Welcome. We're going to be looking into the key legislative events, those high stakes votes, and also the committee work that really shaped this past week in Congress. That's November 3 through November 7, 2025.
And just to be clear, all our information, it's coming straight from the official Congressional Record Daily Digest. So you're getting the factual roadmap, the play-by-play of what actually happened.
Right. No spin, just the record.
Exactly. And our goal here, our mission, if you like, is really about synthesis. We're taking those detailed daily records and we're pulling out the main threads, the big procedural fights, the confirmations that caused a stir, but also those quieter bills that actually made it through. Trying to give you that full picture.
A complete view of the legislative activity for the week. And look, before we really jump in, please do take a second to like and subscribe and just make sure you get this kind of analysis pulled directly from the official sources as soon as we put it out.
Definitely helps us keep doing this.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit for this week. The House of Representatives, pretty quiet. They just had brief pro forma sessions Tuesday and then one scheduled for Friday.
Right. Mostly just gabbling in and out.
Which means all the real action, the votes, the procedural maneuvering, the nominations, that was all happening over on the Senate side.
That's where the focus was, absolutely.
So when you look at what dominated the week, I mean, one thing really stands out, doesn't it? Keeping the government's lights on.
Always seems to come back to that.
Yeah. And that brings us straight to the main legislative sticking point. It's the Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act, formerly known as House Resolution 5371.
H.R. 5371. That's the stopgap funding bill they need for the fiscal year 2026. It's become almost routine, these continuing resolutions.
But this one hit a snag, a big one.
It did. And it's more than just the bill itself. It really becomes a test of how the Senate operates procedurally. Let's walk through the timing. The Senate picked up consideration of the motion to proceed to House Resolution 5371 back on Monday.
Right, and that motion to proceed part is crucial, isn't it? It's not even debating the bill yet.
Exactly. It's the procedural gate. It's basically asking, should we even start talking about this bill formally on the floor? And in today's Senate, just getting through that gate often requires clearing a major hurdle.
Which means invoking cloture. You can't just start debating something controversial anymore.
Correct. Cloture, governed by Senate Rule 62. You need that vote to cut off further debate on the motion to proceed. Not even the bill itself yet, just the motion to get to the bill.
It sounds complicated, but it's the reality.
It is, and this is where that magic number, 60 votes, comes into play. That critical vote, the one to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to House Resolution 5371, that happened on Tuesday.
Okay, so Tuesday was the key day for this. What was the outcome?
The outcome was, well, decisive in its own way. The vote, it's recorded as vote number 603, was rejected. The tally was 54 yeas to 44 nays.
54 yes votes. I mean, that's a majority. A pretty solid 10-vote margin in favor of moving forward.
It is a majority, yes. But that's only like half the picture in the Senate these days.
Because it wasn't 60.
Precisely. It's the math of Rule 62 that dictates things here. 54 votes fell 6 votes short of that necessary 60-vote supermajority you need to break a procedural blockade like this one.
So even though more senators wanted to debate the bill than didn't, they couldn't.
Right, and that tells you something important. It signals that the underlying disagreements may be about specific policy riders attached to the funding, or the overall spending levels, or maybe some executive branch priority tucked inside those disagreements were strong enough to keep 44 senators unified in opposition.
Even with the possibility of a funding lapse looming.
Even with that pressure, those 44 votes effectively put up a wall.
Okay, so we have the standoff. 54 senators want to move, 44 say no, and the rules say no wins for now. What does Senate leadership do then? The clock is ticking on government funding.
They dig in, procedurally speaking. They use a tactic meant to show they're serious and that this is the priority. So even though that cloture vote failed on Tuesday, the Senate leadership kept House Resolution 5371 as the pending order of business for the rest of Wednesday and all through Thursday.
Keeping it as the pending business. That's a classic Senate move, right? What does that actually achieve?
It basically jams the legislative gears.
Yeah.
By keeping this stalled bill as the official business before the Senate, it prevents other potentially controversial or contested bills from coming to the floor for debate or amendments.
So it freezes the calendar.
Essentially, yes. It focuses all the attention, all the pressure on this one unresolved issue. It's like parking a giant truck in the middle of the only road out of town. Nothing else significant can really move until this truck is dealt with.
It becomes a staring contest almost.
You could see it that way. It effectively turns the Senate floor itself into a high-pressure negotiation space. Leadership, by refusing to move on, is sending a very clear message. A compromise must be found. Those missing 6 votes have to materialize, likely through some concessions or changes to the bill's language.
Or maybe just waiting for someone to blink.
That too. But the Senate can't really tackle other major business until this pending issue is either advanced, meaning they find the 60 votes, or leadership makes the much more dramatic decision to pull it and substitute something else.
And all this Senate drama is happening while the House is quiet.
Pretty much.
Well,
As you said, the House was just in those brief pro forma sessions. They'd already passed their version of House Resolution 5371 and sent it over to the Senate.
so the House did its part, constitutionally speaking. They passed the bill. Now they wait.
They're waiting. The ball is entirely in the Senate's court. And that puts immense pressure on the Senate, specifically on finding that small group of senators, maybe from both parties, whose votes are needed to break the logjam.
History suggests these things usually end with changes to the bill, not changes to the rules.
Generally, yes. These standoffs are typically resolved when the substance of the legislation is tweaked just enough to bring those necessary 6 or however many votes on board, not by blowing up the procedural rules themselves.
So the whole week, legislatively speaking, was kind of overshadowed by this funding fight. Those 6 missing votes really set the tone.
They absolutely did. That procedural block became the backdrop for everything else the Senate managed to accomplish.
Okay, so while the Senate floor was technically frozen on that funding bill,
Right, gridlocked on H.R. 5371.
the confirmation process was actually moving along quite briskly. The Senate confirmed 3 pretty significant presidential nominations this week. And looking at how those votes broke down is actually quite revealing.
It really is. You can almost see 2 distinct paths, 2 different tracks for how the Senate handles confirmations right now, based on these votes.
2 tracks. Explain that.
Okay, let's call the first one Track A. This is for the really contentious nominations, particularly the lifetime judicial appointments to the circuit courts. These carry huge ideological weight, right?
Lifetime tenure. Big stakes.
Exactly. And what you typically see here are votes that fall almost perfectly along party lines. Near unanimous support from the majority party, near unanimous opposition from the minority.
And we saw that play out this week.
Twice. First, there was Joshua D. Dunlap from Maine. He was nominated to be a U.S. Circuit Judge for the First Circuit. His confirmation vote was on Tuesday. That's vote number EX 604, and look at the margin, 52 yeas to 46 nays. Very tight.
52 to 46. Okay. What was the second one?
The second followed a very similar pattern. This was Eric Chen-Tung from California, nominated for the Ninth Circuit. Now, for Mr. Tung, they first had to vote on cloture just to end the debate on his nomination. That happened on Monday.
Cloture even on the nomination itself.
Yes. And that cloture vote, vote number 602, passed 51 yeas to 46 nays, barely cleared the simple majority needed to cut off debate.
So right from the start, just enough support to move forward.
Just enough. And then the final confirmation vote for Tung came on Wednesday. That was vote number EX 605. The result,
Yeah.
52 yeas to 45 nays.
52-45, almost identical to Dunlap's 52-46.
Exactly the same number of yay votes, 52. And this tells you a lot about modern judicial confirmations. Remember, the Senate got rid of the 60-vote requirement for judicial and executive nominees a while back, the nuclear option, as it was called.
Right, only a simple majority needed now, 51 votes.
Correct. But look how close these votes are to that absolute minimum. Both Dunlap and Tung landing exactly at 52 yeas. It suggests the majority party had to work hard to get every single one of their members on board, basically.
Maximum mobilization.
Right. And it suggests the opposition was almost completely unified against them, maybe with just 1 or 2 senators absent or peeling off for specific reasons.
So these votes aren't really about, say, qualifications or experience anymore. It's pure ideology.
It certainly looks that way for these lifetime appointments. When you're talking about shaping a circuit court for potentially decades, the ideological dimension just overwhelms everything else. Getting 52 votes is all you need, and that's exactly what the majority achieved twice. It shows a really deep partisan divide on the judiciary.
Okay, so that's track A. The highly partisan, narrow-margin judicial confirmations. What's track B?
Track B is what we saw with the executive branch appointment confirmed this week. These are roles focused more on the sort of day-to-day running of the government. And here, the voting pattern was noticeably different. We're talking about Caleb Orr from Texas.
Okay, or what was his position?
He was nominated to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, a key role in foreign policy and international economics.
And his confirmation process was smoother?
Markedly so.
Oh.
First, the cloture vote to end debate on his nomination. That happened on Wednesday, vote number EX 606. It passed 57 yeas to 41 nays.
57. Okay, that's already different. 5 more yes votes than the judges got for cloture.
Exactly. And then his final confirmation vote later that same day on Wednesday, vote number EX 607. That passed 57 yeas to 43 nays.
57-43. So he maintained that higher level of support.
He did. And that 5-vote difference, 57 yeas for Orr versus the 52 yeas for Dunlap and Tongue, that's really significant, I think.
Why significant? What does it tell us?
It suggests that while the fight over lifetime judgeships is, almost total war, there's still room for some bipartisan cooperation when it comes to staffing the executive branch, especially for these operational roles, things dealing with diplomacy, economic policy, international relations.
So senators might cross the aisle for an assistant secretary of state, but not for a circuit judge.
It seems that way. The political calculus shifts, right? An assistant secretary, while obviously important, isn't setting legal precedents for the next 30 years. There's perhaps a greater sense of shared responsibility to ensure the basic functions of government, particularly in foreign affairs and commerce, can continue effectively.
Operational necessity versus institutional control.
That's a good way to put it. Orr's job is vital for implementing U.S. economic diplomacy. When senators see a nominee as qualified and necessary for a key agency to function, especially one with global reach, they seem more willing to provide that wider margin of support, 57 votes, compared to the bare-knuckle fight over a contested lifetime judicial seat.
So in the same week, the Senate couldn't find 60 votes to even debate funding.
Yeah.
It easily found 57 votes to confirm a key State Department official, while simultaneously confirming judges with just 52 votes. That contrast really sums up the Senate's different modes of operation, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows where the lines of conflict are drawn most sharply and where sometimes a functional consensus can still emerge.
Okay, moving past those necessary items like funding and nominations, the Senate floor also saw a pretty dramatic debate flare up on Thursday. This one was about foreign policy, specifically U.S. military involvement.
Right. This involved Senate Joint Resolution 90, S.J. Rays 90.
And what was this resolution aiming to do?
It was a direct assertion of congressional power in foreign affairs. The text sought to direct the president to remove United States armed forces from hostilities that were happening either within Venezuela or directed against Venezuela if those hostilities hadn't been specifically authorized by Congress.
So this taps into that whole ongoing tension over war powers, right? Congress versus the president on using military force.
Exactly. It's rooted in the War Powers Resolution of 1973, which was Congress's attempt to regain some control after Vietnam. The sponsors of Senate Joint Resolution 90 were essentially arguing that whatever the U.S. military was doing in or near Venezuela at that moment lacked the required green light from the legislative branch.
Okay, so a significant challenge to executive authority. How did they even get this to a vote? Usually things like this get bottled up in committee.
They do. And this one was stuck in the Committee on Foreign Relations. So the proponents had to use a fairly powerful and sometimes controversial procedural tool. They filed what's called a motion to discharge the resolution from the committee.
A discharge motion, that's basically an end run around the committee leadership, isn't it?
It is. It's a way to forcibly pull a piece of legislation out of a committee that's maybe slow-walking it or intends to kill it and bring it directly to the full Senate floor for an immediate vote. It's a tactic you don't see used successfully very often, but filing the motion itself makes a strong statement.
So they forced a vote on whether to debate the Venezuela resolution right now, bypassing the committee process.
Precisely. And the outcome of that discharge vote, which happened on Thursday, vote number 608, was incredibly close. The motion failed, but only by a margin of 49 yeas to 51 nays.
49 to 51. That's razor thin. It failed by just 2 votes.
Just 2 votes.
Wow. Even though it failed, getting 49 senators to vote to immediately yank a war powers resolution onto the floor and challenge the president, that seems like a huge signal.
It's a massive signal. That 49-51 split tells you there's a really deep divide within the Senate on this, and likely a bipartisan one. It's not just about the specific policy towards Venezuela, although that's part of it. It's also about the fundamental constitutional question. Who decides when the U.S. uses military force?
So the 51 senators who voted no, what was their reasoning likely? Supporting the president's actions, or maybe protecting the committee system?
It's probably a mix of both. You certainly had senators who support the administration's current posture regarding Venezuela, but you also undoubtedly had senators voting no based on institutional grounds. They might believe strongly that foreign policy matters should go through the regular committee process, through the Foreign Relations Committee in this case, even if they have concerns about the underlying policy.
The don't bypass the committee principle?
Exactly. Some senators are very hesitant to support discharge motions on principle because they see it as undermining the established committee structure and expertise. But even with that institutional factor, the fact that 49 senators were willing to override it speaks volumes.
It shows a significant bloc wants to reassert congressional authority in this area.
Absolutely. That vote exposes a real fissure. You have those demanding Congress take back some control over war-making versus those who are perhaps more comfortable letting the executive branch have flexibility, or at least want to use the committee process to manage the issue.
And because it was so close, 49-51, this issue clearly isn't settled. That tension over Venezuela and presidential war powers is going to remain a live issue in the Senate.
No doubt about it. A vote that close means the debate is far from over.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the, let's call it the high friction stuff, right? The funding fight stuck at 54-44, the judicial confirmation squeaking by at 52 votes, the Venezuela debate decided by a knife edge 49-51. That's where the big confrontations happen.
Right, the headline-grabbing moments.
But Congress isn't only about confrontation. There's another track, the functional track, where actual legislative work gets done, often quietly, often with broad agreement. Let's shift focus to that now. What actually passed this week?
That's a great point, because beneath the surface drama, the Senate was moving policy forward. This often happens on more technical issues, things that need specific legislative adjustments or studies mandated. And the ability to pass these kinds of measures, sometimes even by unanimous consent without a roll call vote, is really what keeps the machinery of government updated and running.
So what were the key examples of this functional consensus this week? Which bills made it through?
Two standouts that passed the Senate. First, there was Senate Bill 1872. It's called the Critical Infrastructure Manufacturing Feasibility Act.
Okay, Critical Infrastructure Manufacturing Feasibility Act. Sounds important, if a bit dry. What does it do?
It's actually quite timely. It addresses concerns about supply chains, especially from potentially unreliable foreign sources. The bill directs the Secretary of Commerce to conduct a big study.
A study on what?
On the feasibility, hence the name of boosting domestic manufacturing right here in the U.S., specifically for products that are essential for our critical infrastructure. Think about the components needed for the power grid, for telecommunications networks, for water systems, things like that.
So trying to figure out how we can make more essential stuff at home instead of relying on other countries.
Precisely. It's about analyzing how to build more resilience into our core systems, reducing dependency on potentially volatile global supply chains. It feels like a strategic, almost non-ideological response to current events.
Which is probably why it could pass relatively smoothly. What was the other bill?
The other one was Senate Bill 503, known as the NET Act.
The NET Act. N-E-T. What's that about?
This one directs the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. They're tasked with evaluating how the supply chain for telecommunications network equipment, the routers, the switches, the antennas, impacts the goal of achieving universal service, meaning getting broadband access to everyone.
Okay, how does the supply chain affect universal service?
Well, it's partly about security and trust. The FCC needs to understand where this crucial network gear is coming from. This evaluation helps ensure that the money the government spends to expand broadband access, especially in rural or underserved areas, doesn't inadvertently end up funding infrastructure that might be vulnerable to espionage or disruption because of where it was manufactured.
So it's a security check on the hardware used in subsidized networks.
Exactly. It blends national security concerns with the policy goal of expanding internet access.
So just these two bills, one on physical infrastructure manufacturing, the other on digital network security, they show a clear pattern, don't they? A bipartisan focus on strengthening domestic capabilities and guarding against external risks.
They absolutely do. It's where you can often find common ground. And this quiet, consensus-driven work wasn't just limited to bills passing the floor. There was also a lot of procedural progress with other bills being reported out of committee.
Meaning they've finished their committee review and are now ready for the full Senate to consider them later.
Correct. They're placed on the Senate calendar.
Yeah.
On Monday alone, the Senate saw 9 different bills reported out, often with some committee-approved amendments.
9 bills reported on one day. That's a decent amount of committee output. Can we group these by theme? What kinds of issues were they tackling?
We definitely can. There seems to be a focus on, let's say, environmental preparedness, government oversight, and security and transparency.
Okay, start with environmental preparedness.
All right, that would be Senate Bill 1626. This one deals with reauthorizing the National Landslide Preparedness Act. It was reported with an amendment, obviously crucial for safety and resilience, especially in hilly or mountainous areas.
Makes sense. What about security? You mentioned border security earlier.
Yes, a couple related to that. Senate Bill 572 focuses on improving the Shadow Wolves program.
Shadow wolves. Sounds intense.
It's a specialized unit within Customs and Border Protection, mostly made up of Native American officers. They have incredible tracking skills and work primarily on the Tohono-O'odham Nation lands along the Arizona-Mexico border, intercepting drugs and smugglers. S572 aims to strengthen that unique program.
Interesting. Any others on the border?
Yes, Senate Bill 850, which amends the Northern Border Security Review Act, so focusing on the Canadian border, and also Senate Bill 727, which addresses an internal issue, trying to fix a problem where some Customs and Border Protection officers were apparently denied enhanced retirement benefits they should have received, more of an agency fairness issue.
Okay. And the theme of government accountability and transparency.
Several fell into that bucket. Senate Bill 766 mandates an annual report listing taxpayer-funded projects that are significantly over budget and behind schedule. Just basic oversight, really.
Something most people would probably support.
You'd think so. Then there's Senate Bill 81. This one requires agencies to provide clearer statements about the legal weight, or lack thereof, of certain types of guidance documents they issue, trying to make regulations less confusing for the public and businesses.
Okay, and lastly, national security and foreign influence.
Right. Senate Bill 848 requires federal agencies to submit joint reports to Congress about terrorism incidents. And then you had two bills, Senate Bill 856 and Senate Bill 865, both amending the Lobbying Disclosure Act. They seem aimed at tightening the rules around lobbyists, especially concerning exemptions under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARI.
So continued focus on who is trying to influence the government, especially from abroad.
Seems to be a recurring theme, yes. And seeing this volume of detailed bills, 9 of them reported out just on Monday, it really underscores that point. While the Senate might be tangled up on the big-picture spending fight,
It's H.R. 5371.
it's still actively and apparently successfully legislating on the specifics of how government agencies operate, how security is maintained, and how oversight is conducted.
It does highlight that difference. The most impactful laws aren't always the ones with the biggest price tags. Now, besides bills moving out of committee, there were also lots of new bills being introduced, right?
Oh, absolutely. The legislative hopper is always busy. Thursday alone saw 39 new bills and 6 new resolutions introduced in the Senate.
And these cover everything under the sun, presumably.
Pretty much. You always get a mix. And among them, you always find examples that show how senators are working on very specific local issues for their constituents, even while these huge national debates are swirling.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, here's one introduced on Monday. Senate Bill 3095. Its purpose: to require the Secretary of Agriculture to transfer a specific piece of Forest Service land to Perry County, Arkansas.
A land transfer for one county in Arkansas.
Exactly. It shows that hyper-local representation happening right alongside votes on war powers or massive funding bills.
And finally, on this consensus track, we should mention the resolutions that passed. The commemorative ones, the diplomatic ones.
Yes, these are important too. They often pass by unanimous consent, meaning no senator objects, so they don't even require a roll call vote. They're expressions of the Senate's collective sentiment.
What passed this week?
We saw several Senate resolutions agreed to. Senate Resolution 482 officially recognized this very week, November 3rd through 7th, 2025, as National Veterans Small Business Week. A nice recognition.
Good one. What else?
There were also resolutions designating awareness months, which are often important for advocacy groups to highlight their cause. Senate Resolution 484 designated October 2025, the previous month, as School Bus Safety Month. And Senate Resolution 485 designated that same month, October 2025, as National Military Toxic Exposures Awareness Month.
Okay, important awareness issues. Any on the diplomatic side?
Yes, 2 significant ones, signaling foreign policy consensus. Senate Resolution 399 was agreed to, honoring the independence of North Macedonia. And Senate Resolution 459 recognized the strategic importance of something called the C5+1 diplomatic platform.
C5+1. What's that?
That's the diplomatic framework involving the United States, plus the 5 Central Asian nations: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So the Senate is formally acknowledging the value of that engagement.
Interesting. So even while they were deeply divided on how to handle Venezuela,
Right, that 49-51 vote.
they could still come together unanimously, or near unanimously, to express support for North Macedonia and engagement with Central Asia. Shows the different layers of foreign policy making.
It absolutely does. These resolutions project a unified stance on certain alliances and strategic priorities, even amidst other disagreements.
Now, none of that floor action we just talked about, the bills passed, the resolutions agreed to, none of it happens in a vacuum. It all starts somewhere else.
In the committees.
Yeah.
That's where the groundwork is laid. The hearings, the markups, the vetting of nominations. Understanding what happened in the Senate committees this week is crucial because that's what feeds the floor agenda for the next few weeks. It's the legislative pipeline.
Okay, so let's look inside that pipeline. Where was the action this week? Which committees were busiest?
Well, the Senate Judiciary Committee is always a hub of activity, dealing with judges, U.S. attorneys, and major legislation. They had a significant business meeting on Thursday.
What came out of that meeting? What did they approve?
They ordered 2 key items favorably reported, meaning they're recommending the full Senate approve them. On the legislative front, they advanced Senate Bill 1884.
S-1884. What's the purpose of that one?
This is a very specific but quite meaningful bill. It aims to clarify a law from 2016, the Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act.
Okay, here act clarification. How?
It seeks to explicitly limit the use of certain legal defenses, particularly defenses based on statutes of limitations, just the passage of time in lawsuits brought under that act to recover art stolen during the Holocaust era. It's trying to prevent technical legal arguments from blocking claims on their actual merits.
So making it harder to use legal technicalities to keep looted art.
That seems to be the goal, yes, a targeted effort to aid restitution efforts.
Okay, that was the legislation. What about nominations from judiciary?
They also favorably reported one executive nomination. Thomas Ferguson III, nominated to be the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina, a key federal prosecutor role.
But just one nomination reported. That doesn't sound like much given the backlog we usually hear about.
But what they reported isn't the whole story. You also have to look at what was on their agenda for future consideration. That tells you what's coming down the pike. And their agenda was packed.
What was on deck?
A whole slew of judicial nominations. For instance, Robert P. Chamberlain and James D. Maxwell II, both nominated to be district judges for the Northern District of Mississippi.
District judges, the main federal trial courts.
Exactly. Keeping those benches filled is vital for the justice system to function day to day. And they were also scheduled to consider 3 more U.S. attorney nominees.
Or prosecutors.
Yep. James Kruger for the Southern District of Mississippi, Scott Leary for the Northern District of Mississippi, and Ryan Anthony Kriegshauser for the District of Kansas.
So a big focus on Mississippi law enforcement leadership there.
It appears so. And the list didn't stop there. Also scheduled for consideration were 2 more district judge nominees for Louisiana, William J. Crane for the Eastern District, and Alexander C. Van Hook for the Western District, plus Andrew Duviva for Assistant Attorney General at the Maine Justice Department.
Okay, so the Judiciary Committee might have only reported 1 nomination this week, but they're clearly teeing up a large batch of judges and prosecutors for future floor votes.
Precisely. It ensures a steady workflow for the confirmation process. Even if other things, like funding, get bogged down, the confirmation train keeps moving.
All right, beyond judiciary and its nominations, what about major policy hearings in other committees? Where were they digging into substantive issues?
There were several important hearings across different committees, focusing on big areas like healthcare, education, and workforce issues.
Let's start with healthcare. What happened there?
The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which is part of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, held a hearing with the title, Assessing Obamacare.
Assessing Obamacare sounds potentially political.
It could be, but the focus seemed quite technical, actually. More about oversight than repeal. The testimony they heard centered on operational challenges and integrity issues within the Affordable Care Act marketplace.
Such as?
Specifically, they discussed Senate Bill 976. This bill aims to amend the ACA to try and reduce fraudulent enrollments in the health insurance plans offered on the exchanges. So the committee focus seemed to be on making the existing system work better and preventing fraud, rather than a wholesale attack on the law itself.
Interesting. More tweaking than dismantling. Any other health-related hearings?
Yes, the Special Committee on Aging held one. They looked at how the Older Americans Act is working to support families who are dealing with aging-related diseases, like Alzheimer's. They heard testimony about the support systems needed for both patients and their caregivers. It's that kind of oversight checking if existing laws and funding are actually meeting the needs on the ground.
Okay. What about education and the workforce? That's usually a busy area.
It was this week, too. The HELP committee, that's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, held two significant hearings. On Wednesday, they focused entirely on registered apprenticeship programs.
Apprenticeships. That's been a hot topic.
It has. The hearing title was Scaling the Workforce for the Future. The whole discussion was about how to expand these earn-while-you-learn apprenticeship models much faster, seeing them as a key way to fill skills gaps in technical fields and manufacturing.
So, looking for legislative ideas to boost apprenticeships, what was the second HELP hearing?
The very next day, Thursday, they shifted to higher education. The topic was reforming financial transparency in higher education.
Financial transparency in colleges? What's the issue there?
It signals a growing concern, likely across party lines, about the rising cost of college tuition and fees, and the feeling that university finances can be pretty opaque, hard to understand. This hearing could be laying the groundwork for future legislation that might require colleges and universities to provide much clearer disclosures about how they spend their money.
That could shake things up. Any other notable committee hearings?
A few others worth mentioning quickly. The Veterans Affairs Committee held a hearing looking at how to maximize veterans' success after they leave military service. Things like job training, education benefits, transition support. Very practical focus.
Good.
And the Committee on Indian Affairs examined Senate Bill 107. That's a bill seeking to amend the Lumbee Act of 1956, which deals with federal recognition for the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, shows the ongoing, often technical, work involved in federal Indian law.
Okay, so a lot of policy being examined and refined in hearings. Now, back to nominations for a second. Did other committees besides Judiciary advance nominees this week?
Yes, several others moved nominations forward, again showing those parallel tracks operating. The Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee had a busy nomination session on Wednesday.
What did they approve?
They ordered favorably reported Edward Forrest to be the administrator of the General Services Administration, the GSA. That's a huge job, basically the federal government's landlord and chief administrative officer.
Right, GSA is critical infrastructure for the government itself.
Absolutely. They also advanced Charles Arrington to be a member of the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which oversees labor relations within the federal workforce. And importantly for the local D.C. area, they advanced 3 nominees to be associate judges for the Superior Court of the District of Columbia: John Kwang Trung, Olana S. Suttonberg, and Stephen F. Rickard.
So, keeping the D.C. courts staffed as well. Which other committees moved nominees?
The Agriculture Committee also had a productive nominations meeting. They favorably reported a slate of key leaders for the Department of Agriculture, the USDA.
Like who?
Mindy Brashears to be Undersecretary for Food Safety, a critical role. Stella Harrell to be an Assistant Secretary. And John Walk to be the Inspector General for the department, the internal watchdog.
Food Safety, Assistant Secretary, Inspector General. Those sound like core leadership positions for USDA.
They are. And getting them reported out of committee means they're now in line for those final confirmation votes on the Senate floor, likely passing with those wider Track B type margins we discussed earlier. It just reinforces that the executive branch is getting staffed up, even while other legislative battles rage.
Okay, and one last point on the committee work. You mentioned the House was quiet on the floor, but were there committees doing anything? Filing reports, maybe?
Yes, exactly. Even though the House wasn't holding floor votes, the procedural wheels kept turning. Their committees were busy finalizing reports on bills they'd already approved.
And filing a report is the step that officially makes a bill ready for the House floor.
That's right. It signifies the committee work is done. And on Tuesday, House committees filed reports for 10 different bills. And looking at the list, there's a very strong theme.
What was the theme?
Financial services and regulation. Almost all of them dealt with banking, deposit insurance, or related oversight. Well, there was the report filed for House Resolution 5344. This is a bill to amend and extend the Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Rewards Act pilot program. That's a tool used to incentivize tips that help recover assets stolen by corrupt foreign officials.
Okay, a targeted anti-corruption measure. What else?
The rest were mostly technical amendments to major banking laws. Changes to the Federal Deposit Insurance Act, the Bank Holding Company Act of 1956. There were also bills addressing bank stress testing requirements and rules around something called the Community Bank Leverage Ratio.
So lots of detailed adjustments to how banks are regulated and supervised.
Exactly. This whole cluster of reports coming out at once strongly suggests The House is poised to take up a package of financial services legislation very soon after they return to full session. The committee work is done. These bills are ready to go.
So as we sort of wrap up our look at this week, November 3rd to 7th, there's one more piece of news on the nominations front that came in late Thursday, a pretty high-profile one.
Ah, yes, the NASA administrator nomination?
Right. The Senate officially received the nomination of Jared Isaacman from Pennsylvania to be the next administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA.
Isaacman's nomination is interesting. He's known for his background in commercial spaceflight, having commanded the Inspiration 4 mission, and also as a tech entrepreneur. That profile might make him a potentially less controversial, maybe even consensus-driven choice for the role.
Could be, but it's still a process, right? His nomination now goes to the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee for review and hearings.
Correct. And then, assuming they report him favorably, he'll need that final confirmation vote on the Senate floor. It'll be another test of how smoothly the Senate can process these big, visible nominations alongside everything else.
But even with that new nomination arriving, and despite all the activity we've discussed, the committee work, the confirmations, the smaller bills passing the main political story of the week, didn't really change, did it?
No, it didn't. The central piece of legislation, the must-pass item, that Continuing Appropriations Act, House Resolution 5371, it ended the week exactly where it began.
Stalled.
Completely stalled. That motion to proceed is still stuck. The vote count remains 54 yeas to 44 nays. There are still 6 votes short of the 60 needed to break the procedural deadlock and actually start debating the funding bill itself.
So no progress on preventing a potential funding lapse down the road.
None whatsoever on the floor. And that really crystallizes those parallel tracks we talked about throughout this discussion.
Track 1, the high-friction path, defined by that failure to get 60 votes for funding. Defined by needing every last vote, just 52, to confirm lifetime judges. Defined by that razor-thin 49-51 split on war powers in Venezuela. That's where the power struggles play out.
Absolutely. And then, running right alongside it, track 2. The high consensus, low-friction path. That's where you saw the successful passage of those technical bills on infrastructure manufacturing, like Senate Bill 1872 and Telecom Security, Senate Bill 503. You saw the unanimous agreement on resolutions honoring veterans or allies, and you saw that huge volume of committee work, processing nominations for executive roles, refining laws on art recovery or healthcare fraud.
So, depending on where you look, the Senate seems both completely stuck and remarkably productive at the same time.
It's a contradiction, isn't it? And that leads us to the final thought, maybe for you listening. When the main highway for major legislation like funding the government or authorizing military action gets blocked by that 60-vote procedural barrier,
Right.
what effect does that have?
Where does the energy go?
Exactly. How does that friction reshape the legislative landscape? It seems to force a lot of the real substantive policy work onto that consensus track, or deeper into the committee process where bipartisan agreement might still be possible on the details.
It suggests that maybe the most durable, lasting changes to law don't always come from those big headline-grabbing floor fights that end in stalemate.
But rather from the steady, often quieter functional work that manages to build that bipartisan consensus in committee and then passes without a major floor battle.
That tension, that balance between the necessary confrontations and the necessary functional progress that really defined this week in Congress.
It certainly did.
Well, thank you for joining us and walking through these official records. We hope this detailed look gives you a clearer picture of how things actually work or sometimes don't work on Capitol Hill.
And we encourage you to keep thinking about that dichotomy. The gridlock on the big stage versus the continuous churn of policy work behind the scenes. It's a dynamic that shapes much of what happens.
Until next time, take care.